Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker, shills, debt slaves, serfs, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, terrorists. I'm usefully welcome. And today, speaking of new wars, we have a new conflict unfolding in Syria. And so there was a small period of celebration that the Assad government had been removed. And it did happen all of a sudden. And then, of course, a little research, and we find out that the U.S. and Turkey were involved in that final push, and the Assad government was removed, and then a HTS, a terrorist jihadist group, basically took over Syria, and so now it's fascinating because the U.S. is now supporting the HTS government, and they're literally Al Qaeda. They just changed their name. And this is really problematic because, of course, Al Qaeda was supposed to be enemy number one for the U.S. We invaded Afghanistan for that reason. We invaded Iraq, even though Al Qaeda was not in Iraq. They are now. But the U.S. and the Western powers armed Al Qaeda in Libya to topple Gaddafi and the legitimate government of Libya. And in Syria, it's taken us 10 long years of funding and arming and training Al Qaeda in Syria, and now they've taken over the government there and they've taken over the country. So the U.S. achieved its goal of removing Assad and what they considered a rogue regime in Syria, but now they have to bear the fruits of what they've sown, because we have Al Qaeda in charge in Syria right now. And so now it kind of makes more sense that the United States, and particularly Israel, would spend a month or so bombing all the military capacity in Syria. They don't want a Syrian military power there. And in some ways, they are fully aware that they have a jihadist government in Syria, and they don't want them to basically inherit a huge cache of military equipment. But what's happening now shows that this stuff can blow up in your face. First of all, we have Syrian soldiers that have made an incursion in Lebanon, are now clashing with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And so that's not a good sign. And then we also have the fact that the Turkish government has troops all in the northern part of Syria and are basically occupying part of the country. We have Israel has occupied the Golan Heights and then occupied a whole swath of territory just north of Damascus, and has even warned the Syrian government not to come to that part of the country. And so in a lot of ways, the country's being carved up, but then we have the jihadist government there now is unleashing some ethnic cleansing. And there's a big story just a week ago where this attacks on the Alawites, a religious minority in Syria, 10% of the population, that over a couple of days, 937 civilians were killed, 25 government security forces were killed, and supposedly pro-Assad militants, 148 of them were killed. And then most disturbing, apparently there's been quite a few massacres, and these are confirmed by eyewitness accounts. And the official numbers that came out are talking about 1,000 or 2,000, but it's starting to come out that over 10,000 have been killed. And so this is a pretty large scale. And this is the kind of thing we've seen in country after country in the Middle East when jihadists have their way. Tens of thousands of people end up being slaughtered, and it's usually because of ethnic and religious divides between Sunnis and Shiites and everyone else. And then we also have 10,000 mostly Sunnis and Alawites that have left Syria and gone into Lebanon, particularly the Alawite area in Lebanon. So we have a surge of refugees leaving the country. Sounds familiar. After 10 years of what was characterized as a civil war, when it was actually an attempt for regime change. It was definitely not a civil war per se, but now we see the results of it, and now we're seeing deja vu. We have a refugee Syria surge going out of the country, and then we have slaughters going on along ethnic and religious lines, and it just seems like the same old playbook. And for me, one thing that I think about when I watch this is how funny it is that Syria and toppling Assad used to be the cause du jour, and it was splashed over the news every single day. And of course, we had millions of U.S. citizens on their Facebook pages showing support for the toppling of Assad and getting rid of this evil dictator and championing this cause. And it went on for 10 years, and then all of a sudden, it was no longer the cause du jour. All the same things were still going on, and it just ceased to be a matter that Americans were concerned with. And I see some weird parallels to the way Americans champion this whole idea of Ukraine and defending democracy against these evil Russians. And at some point, it's going to cease being the cause du jour too. But it shows just how fickle it can be, and the idea of selective outrage. As long as the media and the politicians kept the Syria war in the spotlight, then it was a big deal to everyone. But as soon as they don't, then it's just a distant memory. And it'll be interesting to see if we reach that point with Ukraine at some point. But here we are in Syria, and of course the whole thing is complicated by the fact that a fifth of the country is occupied by U.S. troops. And I already did a video on that. There seems to be some peace agreements that are being worked towards with Turkey and the Kurds, and perhaps it's going to give us cover to take U.S. troops out of Syria and basically try and stave off the chaos. But the chaos is already there, and that's one of the dangers we have right now, of course, too, is that with 2,000 plus U.S. troops in Syria, if this current slaughter gets any larger, U.S. troops are going to find themselves in the middle of this quagmire, this shit. Now, I don't necessarily expect any direct confrontations between Syria and their jihadist government. They seem to be pretty comfortable so far with U.S. troops being there, but at some point things will get out of control, and we'll just keep our eyes open to see if U.S. troops end up getting caught up in this and how long this is going to go on. But it's funny about the Middle East. You know, every time there's a conflict, it seems to wind down, then it just morphs into another kind of conflict. And so here we are in Syria. We thought the dust would settle and they would rebuild their new country without Assad. And instead, we're just seeing the same old violence spreading. And it's always along religious and sectarian and ethnic lines. And that seems to be the burden of that area of the world. You know, how much can we do when the Sunnis and the Shiites are at each other's throat, and there's Sunnis and Shiites in all of those countries, and they need to get their shit together, to put it simply. So anyway, Syria, good times. I'm useful to it, don't you be one too?